Hey guys, welcome back to Rooted in the Story. We're in Act 3, Part 4, finishing up the entire Old Testament here. So we're really looking forward to this. And I'm Nate.
And I'm Ash.
And I forgot to introduce us.
Okay, with all of that information, we definitely need a refresher. So, Nate, can you map out and explain a little bit of what has happened in the last four parts?
Yeah, it's a lot. So I'm going to do this pretty quickly, and it's going to be concise. We're talking like one to three books of the Bible in one sentence, but it's okay. So quick recap of Israel. God chooses Israel. They are then removed from Egypt. They then wander, and then they get to the Promised Land. They are then to live counter to the world around them. Yet they aren't very good at this. They notice that other nations have a king, and they decide that they want a king. God grants their wish of having a king, and they have kings. Some are good, some are bad. These kings don't help them out at all, though, as they continue to be unfaithful to God. This leads to Israel spiraling out of control. Israel goes from internal or external conflicts with other nations to external, where they're battling each other. The division leads to them being taken into exile. Well, first they actually get split up, then they get taken into exile. This means that their land is actually taken from them. And that means that they've lost their place of worship and their comfort. And so that's a really summarized version of the Old Testament, but that's kind of where we're at. So, Ashley, we hear this word exile kind of being thrown around when we talk about the Old Testament. What are the implications of exile, and why does this happen?
Yeah, so the exile changed history forever. It meant that the Israelites had to really surrender and put their hope and trust in God. After years of God being ever so patient in waiting for them to obey and follow the one true God, they were leaving what was familiar and walking into, quite literally, the unknown. The only thing that they had left to hold on to with them was God. It was a test of their faith to see if they could really have faith in their always faithful Father. The exile was not easy, though. We can read about the grief that the Israelites face in the book of Lamentations. These lamentations, also known as laments, have a focus on the Lord and paradoxically offer hope and a restoration and renewal throughout all of this. Through the exile, Israel needed to learn, like how most of us can learn from a situation of walking into the unknown. The Israelites were to learn to be confident that the Lord is the Lord God of all nations and the Lord of all creation. And even though the Israelites might feel conquered, they are reminded through the prophets that their God will never be conquered. We can learn and take away so much from the story of the Israelites in exile, which we will touch on a little bit later in this video. So when they return to the land, what exactly is happening with all of that?
Yeah, so when they're taken into exile, they are removed from the land that they had. And with that, the temple that they worshipped in, Jerusalem, was actually destroyed. So things are actually quite bleak. But then, the Babylonians, who have them in exile, are actually defeated. And the people that defeat them allow the Israelites to either go home or stay. And surprisingly, some of the Israelites decide to not go back. They decide to stay. And that's an interesting response, because you'd think that they'd want to go back to what was comfortable and what they knew before. But with those who returned, they decided that they wanted to rebuild the temple. And so in a really courageous act, they rebuilt the temple so that they could experience God's presence again. But it wasn't quite as nice as what they made it before. And they faced some challenges, of course, because the land that they go back to is now lived in by other people. How will they respond to these new people returning and rebuilding this massive temple to worship this God that they themselves don't even worship? And so this return in one way is a good thing. Even though that they continue to struggle with idolatry and with sin, they worship God and they try their best to live differently.
So the story might seem a little bit hopeless, but even though God is working through his people, they continue to rebel. So what is the plan through that all?
Yeah, what is God's plan? So the prophets kind of point to this over and over again, that God has not forgotten his promise, these promises that he's made to all of these big people in the Bible over and over. God will renew Israel and then draw all nations to himself as he had promised to Abraham. In that process, the whole of creation is to be renewed. God's kingdom will be established over the whole earth. And all of this points to the coming of Jesus. And now we're not going to expand on that a lot because the next 3 videos are going to talk so much about the implications of Jesus coming to earth, dying on a cross, and rising up again. Spoiler alert if you didn't know that. But yeah, so our next video is going to talk a lot about Jesus, but that's God's plan. Okay, actually, as we conclude Act 3, basically the entire Old Testament from Genesis 4 to end of Malachi, what are 3 big takeaways from this section as it relates to the mission of God? Because that's kind of what we're looking at here.
Exactly. So, wow, the Old Testament is such an incredible yet complex story. It is such a beautiful painting of how us as humans can experience and seek out God's character in the daily, mundane tasks, as well as the hard moments when we don't know where else to go. We learn so much about the mission of God and how to rest in his promises. Throughout every moment of the Old Testament, God is ever so present. In Genesis, when God walks in the garden with Adam and Eve, to walking closely with Abraham and then Moses to bless and lead a people and a nation, to the kings that were appointed to lead Israel, to finally the Israelites being in exile and returning to the promised land. Lots of stuff, and God was never distant throughout it all. He never left or forsake his children. He continued to guide, bless, forgive, love, and look out for every single person in the whole biblical story. It shows us how to trust God and how to continually have hope in him, despite our circumstances. I've said it 100 times in this video series, and I will say it 100 more until it's drilled in your head. God is continually faithful even when we are not. He is in constant pursuit for us to accept the invitation of a relationship with him, and he is faithful to continually fulfill his promises. He is a God who wants the best for us and does everything out of love for us to learn and grow. We can take all of this into our own lives and rest in these beautiful promises of his character. And we can even go one step further and learn from these characteristics of God and be a mirror reflection of them daily so that other people know his great love. So the story of the Old Testament sets up a clear foundation of the God we follow and how humans relate to that in the world.
So that concludes Act 3. We split it up into 4 parts because there was just so much to take in. And so we hope that you guys have enjoyed this and that it's just a great way to dive deeper into our Bibles. In the next video, we're moving into the New Testament. All of this builds up to something, and it's to Jesus. And that's why we spend so much time in the Old Testament, to understand why is there such a longing for Jesus. So thanks for watching.
See you next time.